Well, this is a big weekend for Jim Kaat because day before yesterday, he turned 87, making him only 2 years younger than the corrected age of Hal Richmond, who is 89. Exactly 2 weeks from tonight, Jack McKeon will turn 95. And he is still sharp as can be. At age 72, he managed the Marlins to the World Championship at the expense of the Yankees in the 2003 World Series. A legendary figure, two-time manager of the year, and he was managing in the Senators' minor league system when Jim Kaat was coming up, and that is where they established their lifetime friendship and lifetime baseball bond. You want to go first, Jack? Go ahead.
Thank you. Great to be back. Randy called me about a couple months ago, and he said to me, how you feeling? I said, good. He said, how's your memory? I said, great. He said, do you remember Jim Kaat? I said, look, I'm so old, I can remember Preparation A. And then he said to me, you believe in the Constitution? I said, yeah. He said, you believe in free speech? I said, yeah. He said, well, I want you to introduce Jim Kaat at the New York Sports Baseball Hall of Fame. I said, well, knowing Rennie, I said, well, how much do I have to pay you? He said, no. He said, now, since you believe in free speech, you're on to introduce Jim Kaat. I said, good. I said, I wonder if you talked to Jim Kaat. He said, yeah. I said, well, he probably remembers me too, Rennie, as his 300 hitting catcher at Missoula. A guy that hit three ways, right, left, and seldom. But I did hit 300 that year. I hit 150 right-handed and 150 left-handed. In fact, the last day of the season, I broke my first bat. I was backing out of the garage. But really, 67 years ago, I was a young playing manager in Missoula Timberjacks of the Class C Pioneer League, farm club of the Washington Senators. And after spring training, I had a young 19-year-old, skinny, 6'4", left-handed pitcher assigned to my team. Well, it didn't take me long. After a couple of weeks, I realized I had a special talent here. So, a guy named Jim Kaat. Jim Kaat had a vision to pitch in the major leagues. He was a dedicated young man, had tremendous desire, great work habits, baseball smarts, and a great attitude. In those days, we didn't have pitching coaches, hitting coaches, trainers, analytics, radar guns, pitch counts. We didn't have any of that stuff. We had a 17-man roster in the Class C Pioneer League, and it was a good league, strong league. Many major leaguers came out that year. But, when you look at it, I said, God, this is great. I got a gem on my hands here. So, every day I take these guys out, the young guys. We have a meeting, and I go over different things. And I tell them, look, I've been in Missoula for a couple of years. You fellows got to watch what you do around this town now. You got to check. There's a lot of young ladies that just chase these ball players. And there's a lot of bars. We didn't have drugs. We didn't hear about drugs in those days. I said, there's a lot of, a lot of bars and stuff like that. So I said, be careful. But I mean, I want to tell the players that, look, you want to be a big leaguer, you can't be robots. You got to do a little thinking on your own. Baseball's a thinking man's game. You're going to be in tough situations. And you can't have someone always tell you how to get out of it. You're going to have to start figuring some ways to get out of it yourself if you want to succeed in this game. That means when you get in trouble, find the solutions, make some adjustments. If you can do that, then you'll continue to rise up the baseball ranks. And also at that meeting, I explained to the players, like I said, about conducting themselves as future major leaguers, staying away from drugs and alcohol. And I got 2 glasses and I brought 2 glasses, one filled with water and the other filled with whiskey. And I put a worm in each one of those glasses. And I said, tomorrow when we come to the ballpark, I want you guys to check and see what the results of these 2 experiments. Came out the next day. The worm that was in water, he was wiggling around. The worm that was in whiskey was dead. And Jim Kaat jumped up and he said, we got it, Skip. If you got worms, drink whiskey. But Jim Kaat, we talk about what a great talent he was. But for a 19-year-old, he was like a pitching coach. We had those long trips, 14, 15-hour bus trips from Missoula to Salt Lake City and Boise, Idaho, so forth. He would get 3 or 4 of those pitchers in the back of the bus and talk about pitching and talk about how he was going to pitch to certain hitters in the league. Guys that was in the league, Bob Uecker and Buck Rogers and Jake Wood, some of them were pretty good hitters. He would try to convince these young players how to get guys out. He was a special talent. And I'm going to close with a final story about the last week of the season. Calvin Griffith, owner of the Senators, then the Twins, and Joe Haynes, pitching coach and pitching guru who had spent many years in the big leagues as a pitcher and a pitching coach. They came down to see our team play. On this day, Jim pitched a 2-hit shutout against Idaho Falls. So after the game, we went out to eat. And sitting around, I said to Joe Haynes, the pitching guru, I said, Joe, what do you think of Jim Kaat? Not enough stuff to pitch in the big leagues. I said, I'll tell you what. I'll bet you a steak dinner that this guy pitches in the big leagues within 2 years. Oh, he said, I'll take that. Oh, good. Jim Kaat pitched in the big leagues 10 months later. I never got my steak dinner. But in 25 years in the big leagues, 14 of those years, Jim Kaat pitched over 225 innings. 14 years. Today, you get 2 pitchers that pitch that many in 1 year. 14 years at 200-plus innings. 3 years at 300-plus innings. Quite an accomplishment. Jim, congratulations. Congratulations, Jim. You've been a Hall of Famer all your life. Welcome.
There is little we can add after Jack finished his after-dinner speech, and he's available for bookings between now and spring training. Jim Kaat, as has been noted and all of us know, is a Hall of Famer. 283 wins, 16 Gold Gloves. He was a good hitting pitcher, too. 16 career home runs, 25 seasons, as has been noted, a four-decade man, a rarity, began in 1959 and continued through 1983. In 1966, as Nancy mentioned, he won 25 games to top the American League and pitched 19 complete games that year. He had 180 complete games in his career. Last year, in the regular season, the 30 major league teams combined for 29 complete games. So at this rate, over the next 6 years, the major leagues in total will fall 6 complete games short of Jim Kaat's career mark of 180. Which only means that the game has changed. The players, including the pitchers today, are wonderful. It's just a different game. And Jim Kaat has seen so much of it. Jim Kaat, I like to say, is a true citizen of the game. Hall of Fame pitcher, yes. Pitching coach, yes. Longtime broadcaster, wonderful broadcaster, could be in a broadcaster's wing of the Baseball Hall of Fame. He was a pleasure to work with. We hit it off right away, and that began or continued a friendship that goes back to St. Louis in the early 80s. And I always kid him trying to come up with a baseball version of the movie game with Kevin Bacon, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. You've heard of this, right? Supposedly anyone who's ever been in the film industry can be connected to Kevin Bacon in 6 moves or fewer. Well, you can connect Jim Kaat, and he's heard me do this before, you'll have to bear with me here. You can connect Jim Kaat to the entire history of baseball in fewer than 6 moves. Connie Mack was born in 1862. He was born during the Civil War. He began managing in the major leagues in the 1890s in the National League with the Pittsburgh Pirates. He then became the manager of the Philadelphia Athletics in 1901. And over the course of a half century, from 1901 to 1950, the A's had some legendary teams filled with Hall of Famers, and they had some atrocious teams. But Mack continued as the manager because he had true job security since he owned the team. So we start with Connie Mack. Toward the end of his tenure, late 1940s, he had a young second baseman named Nellie Fox, whom he foolishly traded to the White Sox. He would go on, Fox, to become a Hall of Famer, and in 1959, he was the American League's most valuable player as the White Sox won the pennant. That was Jim Kaat's first year. Jim Kaat naturally faced Nellie Fox for several ensuing years in the American League. And then, as Jim's career was winding down in the early 80s, Julio Franco made his major league debut in the National League. In 1982, Jim faced Julio Franco. Julio Franco played until 2007. He was 49 when he played his last game in the major leagues. He faced Adam Wainwright, who broke in 2006 and pitched until 2023, and faced players who undoubtedly, at least some of them, will be playing in the 2040s. In 4 moves, Mack, Fox, Franco, and Wainwright. In 4 moves, I have connected Jim Kaat to the entire history of our national pastime and more than half the history of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, a true citizen of the game, Jim Kaat.